Vocalics refers to a group of nonverbal cues that signal significant information that others use to perceive us. In this chapter, we will learn how to describe the impact of voice on perceptions of identity, identify different vocal qualities in audible speech, and list and characterize factors that influence communication accommodation. By using the many features of our voice, we can impact the other person's perception of us dramatically. Indeed, voice and individual perception influence how people make attributions about other people. For example, we often tend to imagine that an underlying personality trait causes the behavior of people. Here are several manipulations to behavior. Intentional manipulations refer to making changes in order to appear unique, whereas unintentional manipulations include examples such as being nervous and talking fast upon public speaking. In both cases, we are constantly being evaluated by other people not only of our speech but also the nonverbal communication that we make. Vocal properties are characteristics of an individual's voice that can be intentionally manipulated or altered to influence understanding in another person. Accent is one example. Accent is the distinct or atypical pronunciation of specific words as a function of region, national origin, socioeconomic class, or other cultural influences. For example, Craig has a strong Southern accent, which sounds unusual to his friends. However, his friends sound unusual in Craig's part of the continent. Another vocal property is articulation. Articulation is the vocal property associated with words or sounds being spoken in a clear manner, where each syllable is distinct and easily heard by the receiver of the message. And the third vocal property is emphasis. Emphasis is the stressing of either syllables or whole words in order to make them stand out as important, or significant, in context of the rest of that utterance. Pause is another vocal property. It is the empty space between words, whether intentional or unintentional. Pause can be intentional to emphasize a point or unintentional to indicate a hesitation about discussing a topic. For example, Bridget stopped midway when she was telling her sister about her new tattoo, when she knew her disapproval for body art. Next, we shall look at pitch. Pitch is the sound of a voice that gives it either a high or low quality. The average woman's voice is typically of a higher pitch than the average of those of men. The thickening of vocal cords during puberty causes the difference in pitch of males and females. And pronunciation is the way that a word or words are spoken aloud. Rate refers to the speed at which people speak, with relatively slower speech rates causing audiences to make a variety of negative attributions. Volume is the degree of loudness of speech. Relative volume refers to the degree of loudness of speech as compared to the other sounds in the environment or to the other speakers. For example, Blake whispered to Adam in class but spoke a little louder on the campus. We will now turn our attention to vocal qualities. Vocal qualities are characteristics of the voice that are relatively stable within an individual person, even though they may vary widely from person to person. There are 7 characteristics for us to consider. First is breathiness. Breathiness is the ethereal or airy quality to a voice, as though the speaker is breathing out while simultaneously speaking. Second is nasality. It is produced by allowing the voice to resonate through the airways into the nasal cavity. For example, Kim Kardashian West is identified by her nasal tone. Third, pitch range is the degree to which an individual can or does reach a variety of high and low sounds. Compared to men's pitch range, women's pitch range is typically located at a higher frequency. Fourth, raspiness is the voice that sounds rough or slightly hoarse, can be described as gravelly in nature. Fifth is resonance. Resonance is the deep and reverberating voice, common in television voiceovers. James Earl Jones's vocal styling exemplifies resonance. Sixth, rhythm is the beat of one speaking, typically with a flow or musicality for the delivery of specific words. And finally, seventh is thinness. Thinness is the weak or insubstantial quality of an individual's voice, sometimes described as reedy in nature. What is the communicative value of silence? Intentional silence has a great communicative value across human interactions. For example, Coulter's mother's long glance can stop him from goofing around in the church. Silence was initially seen as the dead space between expressions of verbal sounds that were of important value, whereas utterance is the expression of sound that is typically verbal in nature. The communication that occurs during intentional silence is predominantly nonverbal. When one intends to communicate the intensity of their feelings, such as anger, ways such as oculesics are used. That way, A charged message can be sent to the recipient. Accommodation is the way in which we manage our communication behaviors in social interactions. We will now have a look at communication accommodation theory, or CAT. This theory considers the ways that we manage our nonverbal behaviors as we interact with both known and unknown others, regardless of how we feel about that other person. Both the current and historical context influence communication. Understanding an individual's nonverbal or verbal behaviors depends on where the person might come from. People exchange both content and relational information upon communication. Their nonverbal cues send a lot of hints about their interpersonal attitudes. For example, Patricia's ability to get help from her friend at work tells us about both their relationship and their hierarchical structure. In terms of expectations of accommodation, convergence in conversational styles is what people expect from others. Therefore, the nature of interpersonal relationships is interpreted by the failure to converge. To manage relationships, individuals use specific communication strategies. Most individuals change their nature of interactions, depending upon their personal and cultural experiences. Approach cues are verbal and nonverbal messages sent by individuals to signal that they are open to interacting with one another. On the other hand, avoidance cues are verbal and nonverbal messages sent by individuals to signal that they are uninterested in interacting with one another in the future. CAT allows individuals to indicate their attitudes toward one another, as an approach or avoidance cue to be interpreted in the social situation. For example, Charles intentionally changes his communication patterns in an attempt to have better interaction with his new boss. It is used as maintenance when they see no reason to change the same communication pattern. Thus, many people engage in strategies that enhance either their similarities or their differences to indicate their desire to either approach or avoid an interaction. Where there is a positive attitude that is felt by an individual for another, the interest to deepen their relationship is indicated. The nature of our relationships, both romantic and with family, friends, co-workers, faculty, coaches, and random people, is constantly being considered. The first main strategy of CAT is convergence. Convergence is to adapt one's interaction style in such a manner that one displays the self as more similar to another person with whom one is interacting. For example, Gregor is happy to have found a new roommate for his apartment and finds himself doing the regional gestures that his roommate uses. By behaving more similarly to one another and indicating a willingness to be approached, convergence increases the perception of closeness. However, it is possible to have a negative attitude toward the partner whom a person interacts with. Despite interacting with one another, they might want to indicate the lack of opportunity for a relationship between the two. Therefore, the second main strategy is divergence. This is a strategy of accentuating the differences in communication style between two individuals. For example, as a part of her job as a barista, Olivia pretends to be very dissimilar from individuals whom she wants to keep a distance from. By behaving very dissimilarly to one another and highlighting difference, divergence increases the social distance. In summary, other people are always evaluating our speech. They also make assumptions of the nonverbal cues that accompany the words we say. Vocal properties and qualities are characteristics that can impact identity perceptions.